Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Virtual Bart, brought to us by Acclaim. Virtual Bart is pretty much the sequel to Barts Nightmare. Both were done by Sculptured Software and released by Acclaim. Virtual Bart was released a couple of years later. The game, like Barts Nightmare, basically has you playing as Bart Simpson, going through a series of different styles of mini-games. Instead of, though, being in a dream, this time you're going through a virtual reality machine, with your main goal being to complete each one of the different games, and if you're able to complete them all, you are the winner and you get to see the game's ending. The game can be very frustrating and difficult in order to complete certain games, but this one is always another one of those personal favorites of mine from back in my childhood. When the game begins, you can either practice one of the mini-games or just start off the game and you'll get your opening cutscene before we get control of Bart at the virtual reality machine. Once Bart is in the virtual reality machine, he spins around. You can press any of the face buttons in order to stop his spinning, and whichever game he lands on, he'll do. You have a limited number of lives or tries. If you fail a game, you lose a life and go back to the virtual reality machine. The space at the top is represented either by a skull and crossbones or by a corn dog. The corn dog gives you an extra life, basically, and the skull and crossbones takes a life. There are 6 total minigames, and the first one that we end up doing in this run ends up being the nuclear post-apocalyptic Simpsons level here, where we have Bart on a motorcycle trying to speed through Springfield. You have a limited time in the upper right corner, as well as a health bar that you have to watch. Bart has the ability to fire at enemies, as well as being able to kick the enemies on the left and right sides of him in order to defeat him. Doing so will actually give Bart a little bit more health, so it's key to try to take out as many of these guys as possible while keeping your speed. You speed up using the B button here. It can be difficult at times during this minigame to stay on the road while also watching out for not only the enemies, but the oncoming hazards like the school bus that's still being driven here in the post-apocalyptic wasteland by Otto. This is actually one of the easier mini-games though, at least in my opinion. You can also tell how far you've made it because you will see like the mile marker on the right side of the road as you're going through. It can be very easy to lose your health though, so be very careful while you're taking out these enemies. And when you take out one, make sure that you kind of go into wherever they were. That way you grab the health that they end up dropping when you do defeat one of these enemies. It also is a little bit of luck when you're able to kick these guys and be able to hit them multiple times in a row before they do a lot of damage to you. There's not an extra ton of strategy though, but the level's not particularly long, and once you do make it to the end, that's one mini game down and we move back to the virtual reality machine.
Just in time. Hey, surviving kids!
I love the cutscenes at the end of each game, especially that one with the play on the classic Simpsons couch gag with Bart arriving at home. Next up, we end up with the baby game. Here you play as Bart, as a baby, trying to get ice cream. This is one of the most frustrating minigames, and as a kid, I could never complete it. For whatever reason, I always end up dying. Thankfully, you do have a couple of lives at your disposal during this minigame. If you run out of all your lives, then it ends up being a lost try at the virtual reality machine. Basically, you have to use the tree branches that are sticking either straight out towards the screen or the ones that are going left and right of the tree in order to keep swinging Bart around. If you miss one of these branches and end up falling into the ground, that's an instant loss of a life, and it's very easy to do so. Getting used to the spins and being able to get the right momentum in order to get Bart to go where you want to is difficult, just extremely difficult at times. Once we're able to get high enough up, we end up landing on this clothesline. During this segment, we have to watch out for the clothes on it, as well as all the other hazards like the paper airplanes, as well as squirrels that are on here. Thankfully, Bart can fire out his pacifier like a normal shot and keep doing so repeatedly to take out all the various enemies. The screen, as you see, scrolls by really slowly, and because of this, you can end up catching too far up to the right side of the screen and end up not being able to actually see where you're going. Be careful at the end of this segment, wait for the balloons to slowly float up, and then you can grab a hold of the balloons, and now you have to control Bart while still attached to these balloons, moving up and down, and sometimes jumping in order to avoid some hazards, like the dogs that are trying to jump up and grab you. Bart can thankfully still fire the pacifier from this location. I highly recommend making sure that you still jump up and grab the extra life, or float down and grab the extra bit of health, so that you try to keep Bart alive as much as possible. Once you complete the section, the minigame's not over. This one's broken up into multiple ones, and is actually one of the longest of the minigames that we'll be completing. During this segment, you play as Bart in a stroller. You even have the bullies from Bart's school that are actually inside strollers as well, and there's a lot of versions of them, because they get destroyed during the course of this, and they just immediately end up respawning and coming back. Mostly pay attention to dodging Bart in and out of all the obstacles, like the fire hydrants, holes, and the different barriers. Thankfully, this area isn't necessarily particularly long, as well as it's not that difficult. When you get to the end of it, though, Bart will end up being flinged out of the stroller and land in the third segment that we get to do here. Honestly, take a nice breather during this one if possible. The third segment has us landing on top of this, I guess, cut-down tree. We then have to start platforming between all these balloons. If the balloons are, I guess, balls that are on seals' noses, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but if they end up going too far down and end up going behind the fence, you end up falling off and end up dying. It's extremely frustrating to time the jumps from each one of these balls that are spinning. At the end of the segment, you'll be able to bounce off of this trampoline and fly into the circus, which is thankfully the final area of this minigame, but it doesn't get any easier from here. One thing to keep in mind that I haven't done, but I will be doing later in this segment, is you can do a parachute-like move using Bart's diaper at any point. This will allow you to float across certain gaps, so when you're doing certain jumps, you can use it to your advantage to help you out. For the first part of the circus, you have to climb all the way up, watching out for all the clowns, and then I recommend waiting for the screen to scroll by so you can easily float in between everything and go down. Now granted, when you're falling down here, you will end up crashing into a bunch of these poles and end up losing some health. Not a whole lot, but I always end up getting hit because I'm much more focused on making sure that I land on the trampoline down below, and then you have to time all your jumps between these rings. Once again, you can use the parachute-like diaper to help you during these ring segments, but I always want to make sure that I land safely on that trampoline at the beginning of that jump, because of course you'll end up losing a life if you crash into the ground. Once again, climb up, watch out for all the clowns that are here, and then you're going to do a couple of jumps between these trapeze artist things. You have to wait for the right moment in order to get Bart across a couple of these. You do have a time limit in the upper right corner, but thankfully that usually doesn't come too much into play while I'm doing these levels. So you want to make sure absolutely that you can make a jump before you attempt to do so. Sometimes you have to wait a bit for it to happen. When you make it to the end of the one, you'll jump off and you'll fall down quite a bit. But then you're going to jump on a trampoline, and then you just have a few more jumps left to do. You have to time it right using Bart's diaper in order to make it across these. I don't think you can make these jumps without having the diaper or using the diaper to help you out, so make sure you do use it, and then jump into the cannon at the end in order to finish up this minigame, thankfully. With that one complete, we now go to another one that I was not the hugest fan of, but it wasn't as bad as the baby one, that's for sure, and that is the pig one. Here we get to play as Bart as a pig inside of a crusty cannery. Basically, it's slaughterhouse for these pigs, and you are trying your best to free them while also taking out the baddies that are running this. Even though it's Krusty's, you're not actually facing Krusty at the end. But you do have some other clowns that you have to deal with. This is a little bit more of a maze-like area. You have a few little goals that you have to do, like, for example, going up into this upper left corner and turning off this machine in order to free all the pigs that are in these nets. You can thankfully jump on top of some enemies in order to damage them, so we'll do that in order to take out that clown. Be very careful when dealing with these machines. If you go into the machine itself while on the conveyor belt, it's an instant death. You'll be turned into a ham. So, as you're doing that, make sure you run across this little conveyor belt here, make a jump across the gap, and make sure you don't fall into the machine. Now we have a little bit of a maze area. We're going to hit 2 of these switches here. This will allow us to come down here in order to free this pig. Then, immediately drop down to the platform just below, go through a couple of doors until you make it to this one with a bunch of numbers. Jump to the right, watching out for the clown firing at you, and grab the key. I know I'm going through a lot of doors very quickly here, just follow the path that I am. They all take you back to basically the same area, but our main goal was, since we got that key, we're going to stop here, grab this cage and free this pig, then go over to this lower right one and go through this door. Just to the left on the conveyor belt takes us to another door, dropping down another door, and this will take us to the room that has the red key. Stay on the conveyor belts though and go through the door that we just went in order to get here, and you can get right back to the room that has the red key locked cell. From there, drop on down after freeing that pig and go through the door that's just below that. Here you have a couple of conveyor belts. Once again, we're just going to go through another door and then drop on down, and if you've saved all the rest of the pigs here, the key that we need, the next key, will be located right there near those switches. If that key's not there, that means you must have missed one of the other pigs and we haven't quite saved them all yet. Since we have that key now, we can come through here and enter into this locked door, which will take us to the freezer, which is basically the next area of the level. Here you have a bunch of blocks that are going to be pushed and pulled out of the wall, and you have to time it so that you'll be able to get through. The platforming isn't the greatest, but it's not the worst either, especially compared to the baby level that we just dealt with a few minutes ago. Wait for the right moment, and once again we're going to jump over here to this left and get back on here because I accidentally missed my jump, and I need to get up to this upper left side. Watch out for all the frozen pigs as you try to work your way across the conveyor belts and end up landing on this platform here that slowly starts to rise up. Of course, when it gets to the top, make sure that you jump off to the right and use the conveyor belts to help you out. The big bounce that you're able to do off of the pig butt here will allow you to get high enough so you're able to make the jumps a little bit easier. Follow the next platform up to the top, and you'll have to wait a few moments for this block to come out, and you'll be able to enter into this door. Going inside this door will take you to basically a mini-boss. What you have to do here is wait for these pigs to come through, and they'll be turned into giant ice blocks. Once they do that, you have to push the ice block over to the right side. Land it on this machine right here, and then wait for the timing to hit this block up into the air and get it caught by these pincers. They will then take it into the furnace, which I guess also saves the pig, I guess. There's an evil clown that's moving back and forth trying to freeze us as well, and the way that he works is the closer you get to him, he'll end up coming towards you. So when we go to the right here, we're able to force him back over to the left side. We can just kind of stand on this platform and wait for him to go to that left side, and then we can continue pushing this pig over to the right, and once again knock it up into the air. Is a little bit of a boring and tedious boss, or whatever you want to call it here. It's not necessarily particularly difficult. If you do take damage, thankfully there is a corn dog located here, a couple of them, so you can grab extra health if you do need it. It'll probably take you a few minutes in order to kind of get the timing down and getting through this, but eventually when you do end up getting enough pigs into the furnace, you'll automatically be transferred into the next segment, which of course is the furnace. After toiling away in the freezer for what seems like forever, we're finally in the next area, the furnace. It's very similar to the freezer, just a red scheme, as well as we now have to deal with some fire, but we still also have those blocks that are coming in and out of the wall that we have to deal with. Climb up a few of them and end up getting on this moving platform, and you can kind of bounce your way up a handful of platforms, including the ones here, which thankfully you bounce so high up you can skip a couple platforms here and there. Run across this, watching out for these crushers that are going to try to squish poor Pig Bart here, and run across all those conveyor belts to the far right. Drop down a little bit, be very careful not to fall into the giant vat of lava, basically. Ride the platform a little bit to this platform here. You'll have to wait a few moments for that one to go back into the wall, but you'll see a platform moving back and forth just below that. Drop onto it as it's going back and forth, and this will allow you to easily get through this area here with all these moving blocks. Now, I think you could technically fall and maybe get lucky to land on them, but you want to take your time since you'll accidentally fall into a lava pit if you fall too far. At the bottom, though, just to the right of those blocks, though, you find a door that takes you to, I guess, the corporate office here, which is where our boss battles take place. Here you have to take out all 3 members of this office team. Basically, you're going to jump on the one guy's head, the guy in the background will jump up and down and cause stuff to fall off of the shelf. The other guy who gets behind the desk will also throw stuff at you, but can take out his friend. Once the one's taken care of, take out the second guy, and then you just have the third guy left. Here, basically, what you'll have to do is get him to jump right by this bookshelf, just like we have basically done with the other guys. It takes a little bit of time and practice, but it doesn't take too many hits, and once they're all defeated, head to the right, free the pigs one last time, and enjoy the little brief ending here for the Pig Bart before we go back to the VR machine. We're now halfway through the minigames here. We have 3 left. The next one that we end up doing is the water slide. This one is difficult, and the reason why is you have a time limit in order to get through it, and it's a lot of luck-based stuff here. The way that it works is you have a timer in the upper right corner that's relatively strict, as well as you have Bart's health in the upper left corner. Your goal here is to slide back and forth, watching out for all the hazards along the way. There are clocks that will come your way that will give you a little bit of extra time, so make sure that you grab them. There's also corn dogs throughout here that will help you. Basically, you have a lot of times where you have to pick either the left or right side in order to continue going. Picking the wrong side will end up running you into Homer being stuck inside of these pipes, and you'll end up having to backtrack a little bit and try again. As you make it farther into the water slide, though, the choice becomes crucial, because if you pick the wrong side, you'll end up flying out of the water slide and end up dying because of it and have to retry again. Because of this, as a kid, I died so many times during this. However, during the crucial segments, there is a guy with a green bathing suit on, and if you pause and look at his bathing suit, it actually has arrows on it that point in the right direction. But you have to pause in order to see it. I think you only get a really good look at him on the most crucial of segments, and when I was doing this for practice, I just kept basically guessing until I eventually got through this. But that's not the recommended way. You can pause it in order to see. There are plenty of times, though, that he's going by so quickly and it may be on a turn, so you really don't even get a good look at the guy. So even though I don't normally do this during playthroughs, and I should have just paused the game, it would have made things a lot easier for me. Instead, what I'll do is I'll slow it down just really slow. When I come up with the guy in just a second, you can kind of see the arrows on his back. So keep in mind to do this easier, pause the game a lot while doing this. But here you go. You can see very briefly there are a couple of arrows on his back that point, in this case, to the right. You only get like 1 frame or so in order to see it correctly, but there you go. That's how you're able to tell which direction you're supposed to go, which is something I never knew as a kid and ended up failing this part over and over again. So yeah, if you've ever died a lot in this and had no idea what you were supposed to do to know which direction to go into, so you make sure you didn't end up dying, that's basically what you had to do. Thankfully though, after enough trial and error, I was able to finally get a run that I was able to get through and survive. The final choice at the very end, if you pick the right one, you land safely into the water, and you move back to the VR machine. We're now down to just 2 of the games left. Next up is the Dinosaur one, and we're saving my favorite one for last, which is the tomato throwing one. In this one, you're playing as Bart, as a dinosaur, and have to go through a series of levels in order to, I guess, survive. Controls during this one are pretty easy, but there's a ton of enemies coming your way. You have a couple of styles of attack. You can use your tail to whip enemies, you can jump on the heads of most enemies throughout the area, as well as you can get a roar, which is represented by the icon I have in the upper right corner. There's a bunch of these spread out throughout the area, and I recommend finding as many as you can to use them at strategic moments. Basically, this will wipe out all the enemies currently on screen, giving Bart a very easy advantage. It's definitely a little bit confusing to get through some of these areas. We'll use the roar here in order to help me get up here, though. If I waited just a few seconds, I could have taken out this Homer as well. Keep climbing up the rocks. Some of them will break apart as you go up. Whip Barney, who is, of course, belching from this platform here, and then continue on and go inside the cave. I took a lot of damage during the course of that, but thankfully when you transition areas, you get all your health back, so keep that in mind when going through this. And that's why a lot of times I just kind of bulldoze my way through a lot of enemies, because I know I'll be getting most of my health back once I go through the next area, so I don't have to worry too much about it. And thankfully you also have a couple of lives at your disposal as well, so you don't have to do it in one go. You have a pretty annoying segment here where you have to climb up a whole series of different jumps, watching out for boulders coming down as well as lava coming out of the walls. And as you make it to the very top, you can actually jump on top of the boulders, as you can see, and make it to the left side and continue moving your way up. Pretty simplistic platforming, and like I said, for the most part, this is the best platforming of the game as far as a straight, back and forth kind of platforming, at least in my opinion. I mean, it's not perfect by any means in this game, but this part isn't really that bad. You do have a lot of it, though. As you can see, you have to go through a lot of these segments, working your way very slowly up a series of jumps. Eventually, though, you will make it to the top of this segment, and we can move on to the next part of the dinosaur levels. Watch out for Maggie at the very top throwing some bones at you. Make sure you also grab the roar at the end of this segment. When you pop out of the cave, head on over to the left side and start climbing up once again. At the top, you'll notice a Triceratops that's running back and forth stampeding. You can jump on it in order to damage it, but we're just going to kind of, after doing so, continue our way up. Basically, up is good during this segment. When you make it to the top here, you'll have both Mr. Burns and Smithers throwing stuff at you, boomerangs. You can use your roar in order to take them out here. We'll have to deal with them again a little bit later on, so use the roar that we just got in order to defeat them. Watch out for Krusty here. Duck on this platform and you'll dodge a giant rock, and when you jump to the platform, Krusty will automatically move off of it because it doesn't want to fall when the platform ends up breaking, but this gives you ample opportunity in order to get up. Continue heading to the right. If you see that spot there with Lisa and Maggie, you want to keep going to the right and get into this cave here. It's pretty dark and hard to see. Just a few steps in, though, you'll notice that there's some nuclear waste that's pouring out of the walls and gives a nice little glowing effect so that you'll be able to see the jumps that we have to make during this segment. A little bit farther in is lava, and now this is where things aren't the greatest, because the lava hit detection on what you can do to fall into the lava is not the best. So if you miss a jump guide just a little bit, you'll end up hitting the lava instead of landing on one of the safe rocks, and this comes forth again later on when we have to deal with ice water. Climb up this segment here, you'll have a whole bunch of, I guess, nuclear rocks that are slowly rolling down the hill. Eventually, you'll thankfully be able to make it to the top here. Run all the way to the right, and eventually you'll come to Smithers and Burns once again. What you need to do is get to the right side and just swing your tail. This will allow you to destroy the nuclear rocks, as well as knock these other rocks up at Mr. Burns. Nice little timing, and you should be able to get this done pretty easily. If you have the roar, though, it's an instant defeat for them. So if you're able to get another roar and keep that, you can use that to help you take out Smithers and Burns there. Thankfully, if you're low on health, when you make it to the next segment, once again, you're full health, and we now make it to the ice part of this level. No surprise, we have more platforms and breakable platforms as we do this whole segment. This, along with the baby levels, are some of the longest of the mini-games that you have to do during this game. At the end of this platform, make a big, giant leap downwards, and hopefully you'll land safely on one of the icy platforms. You'll now be slipping and sliding on all the ice throughout this whole area, so you have to also be very careful that you don't accidentally slide into the water. Wait on this platform as it's moving back and forth so you make it to the next one. Like I said, like with the lava, the hit detection of landing into the water instead of landing safely isn't the best, but there is a couple of extra lives throughout the course of this whole minigame, so you can try to keep your life count up. Wait over here on this platform until this platform rises up, and you'll be able to drop down off the platform and land on it safely. If you don't do it the right moment or do it too early, you'll land in the water, because it's great that way. Thankfully, though, we are at the end here. Basically, you have to climb up a couple of platforms here, waiting for them to slowly make their way over to you. When you make it to this one right here, you have to battle both Homer and Moe, who are throwing stuff at you from the left and right sides. As the platform moves back and forth, you can use your tail in order to whip the platforms that they're standing on, which will slowly get rid of them. It's a pretty simple final boss for this little mini game. You will take damage, but if you're at mostly full health, the rocks that they do throw at you, even when they hit you, do very little damage. Just make sure you don't jump at them and try to land on their platform. Just stay on this and keep swinging at them until you've knocked them completely off of their platforms. Once you got them all the way down to the ground level, whip them one last time and you'll destroy the platform that they're on and thus complete the game. We now have one last minigame left. It happens to be my personal favorite. In this one, you get to throw tomatoes at all the members of Bart's class as they're trying to get a school picture taken. This minigame is broken up into two segments. The first one outside the school and the second one is at the playground of the school. Basically, you have to time it so that this gauge will go up, and when the target of it gets to where you want, you'll throw a tomato and hopefully land on one of the various classmates. You have a relatively strict time limit, so you can't take a ton of time, but usually I don't find that to be the issue. Sometimes it can just be difficult to hit certain students because of their movement across the sidewalk. It is one of those ones that takes practice, but thankfully that's what the practice mode is for, so I do recommend checking the practice mode out for this particular minigame, because it'll really help you get that timing down. The first part outside the school isn't as bad as the second time, where the students will move a little bit more sporadically across the sidewalk, making it harder to hit them. The thing is, though, as you take out students with tomatoes, they'll be replaced by other students and eventually the staff members, including also Police Chief Wiggum. You cannot hit any of them. If you hit one of them, it's an instant defeat, and you end up having to go back and try the minigame over again. The only one you can hit is Principal Skinner, but only if he bends over to tie his shoe while on the sidewalk, so you're able to hit him. Once you've hit all the students, though, you'll then get this class picture with all of them hit by tomatoes, and then you'll move on to the next level of it. This is more of the same, though they move a little bit faster and a little bit more sporadic, as now you're throwing eggs at them instead of the tomatoes, but the core gameplay remains the same here. As a kid, even though I could never actually complete a lot of the other games included here when I would rent the game, as I never owned it, I would always keep renting it pretty much just to play this mini game. I also really like the motorcycle one, so those two I played the most. The pig one, as well as the water slide one, I had a hard time figuring out exactly where I was supposed to go, and ended up getting lost. The dinosaur one I would be able to beat, and the baby one was an absolute nightmare. Not exactly Bart's Nightmare, but still a nightmare nonetheless. The SNES version that I've been playing throughout the course of this one is pretty much identical to also the Genesis version, other than a couple of little minor things here and there, but they contain the same mini games, so if you have played one version, you played both of them pretty much. This was also the last Simpsons game I really remember playing when it was still relatively new as a kid. As I got older and the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era happened, I kind of avoided Simpsons games for a while. I eventually checked out Simpsons Wrestling, which is wow, and then eventually Simpsons Skateboarding. Another personal favorite of mine is Simpsons Bowling in the arcade, which used one of those trackball controllers in order to roll the ball, and that's something that I enjoyed when I found an arcade cabinet of it on vacation with my family years ago. When you take out all the students once again, this time with the eggs, you've completed all the games here and you get to sit back and enjoy the ending to Virtual Bart. So, there you have it. There's Virtual Bart for the Super Nintendo. Overall, very similar in some ways to Barts Nightmare. I still have a lot more nostalgia for Barts Nightmare than Virtual Bart because I actually owned Barts Nightmare as a kid, and this one I never owned until much, much later down the road. As a huge Simpsons fan that I've been since the very beginning, I loved playing the games, even though most of them were never that great outside of a few, moments in certain games, as well as, of course, the classic arcade game from Konami. It's been a while since we've seen any sort of Simpsons video game, the last one being the Simpsons game, which was made around the time of the Simpsons movie, so it's been quite a bit since we actually had that. And I've actually never finished that game because I got to the last level and my save got corrupted on my Xbox 360 version, and I didn't feel like playing the game all the way over from the very beginning. So I've never seen the ending to the Simpsons game. Maybe one day I'll give that one another shot. But as the credits finish up, we go back to the title screen, we can start the game all over again. But with that, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.